Alrighty, that going and share my screen. And we are in business. So good morning, everyone. Happy July 4th. So of course, lots to celebrate. Love your shirt, Sister Minnie. Alrighty, so we in our adult Sunday school have been talking about the line of Ham, looking from the Tower of Babel to the time of Abraham. So right now we are in the 2400s BC. We are during the lifetime of Peleg, who's grown up in the after Babel world, and his ancestor Shem is still alive, 5 generations still alive while all this is going on. So going to our project here, 2, 3, and let's get the ball rolling. So when we last left off last Sunday, we talked about leading up to the unifying of the whole nation of Egypt for the very first time by these sons of Ham. And so what we're basically going to do is take a visual tour through the people of Egypt as society is developing and advancing, gearing up eventually to be the Egypt Abraham would come spend time with. And so we'll have a greater understanding of that. So last week, towards the end, left off at this slide I want to come back to here. Let's see, right about, that's the one. So we talked about the whole idolatry, the whole elevating of man to God status, and all that went with that, and how this spread throughout the different societies across the globe over time. At the bottom here, we have amongst these other nations, of course, Israel, Baal, and Ashtoreth. We have the father Nimrod, we have the mother and wife Semiramis, and the son, the Messiah figure, Tammuz. Israelites, they had Baal and Ashtoreth. Egypt, Ra, Osiris, Horus, Isis, Hathor. Scandinavia, we mentioned having Odin, Balder, and Frigg or Freyja. You might think, well, that was then, why do we care about any of the stuff? None of the stuff is around today. Well, actually, some of these folks are actually recognized every single week of our daily lives. Odin is also known as Woden. Woden with a W in front of it. He has his own day, every week, right smack in the middle. It's called Woden's Day. Over here, we call it Wednesday, but that's where it comes from. His wife, Freyja, is where we get Friday. And their son, Thor, is where we get Thursday or Thor's Day. So the impact of this is still with us even to this day. So we're just going to basically be taking a visual tour through the world that Peleg is growing up in as we're making our way to Abraham. So let's go down now to a place that was mentioned a bit earlier on after the flood, as they go and spread out and go back down to the land of Shinar, land of Sumer, the Persian Gulf, as we recognize it here. The first city that was actually established back then was this one right here, Kish, a city-state kingdom, and it's still going while all this is happening in Egypt. We have to remember when we read something in the Bible or we hear about one place, life is still going on everywhere else too. And so some things are happening at the same time. Well, at this time frame we're talking about in Egypt, in this lifetime of Peleg, we've got a new ruler here in Kish. His name is Attab. So life is still going on. But taking us back to the line of Ham over in Egypt, we are now at the birth of the nation of Egypt as one unified country. We saw how at the end of this Dynasty 0, like the prequel to the Dynasty 1, the first dynasty just being a line of rulers, how this guy named Narmer moved up into the north and started, consolidating all of this. Well, it's his son Aha, or Menges, who is going to be the final king to unite it all. He's going to be the first king of this united Egypt. So Dynasty 1 starts now with Narmer's son. And we saw a lot of clues that Pharaoh Narmer could actually be Nimrod. So it could very well be that Nimrod's son is the first pharaoh of United Egypt. It makes sense, it fits. I can't say that for 100%, so we leave that open, but very likely possibility. So this guy, Aha, taking us back to Egypt. So he conquers the north. And this symbol here, see this guy, he's kind of bowing down. Well, in Egyptian art and imagery, these are the guys in the north who were conquered. Now they're subservient, and now they're bowing down under this united Egypt. So that's something we see there. They're called the Rekiat, those guys in the north who are all conquered under Pharaoh Menes. Now here we have two descriptions of the Pharaoh. This is called his Horus, Horus being the bird, the sky god, the falcon, the hawk. So there's where we see his Horus name. Later on, pharaohs would be given these things, name tags called cartouches. And this came around much later. So this is actually talking about the same guy, just different ways of referring to him. And with the cartouches, they would give him a different name, but talk about the same guy. And that confuses the heck out of me. I grew up under Reagan, President Reagan, as a teenager. If someone later came along and said, okay, now that he's gone, we're going to officially call him President Bob. No, he was president. I have no idea who President Bob is, but they do this in the Chinese culture too, where on their oracle bones, which are written on the bones of tortoise shells, they would write things, they would give their emperors names after they died. So the name you were used to knowing them by as you lived under them was not what they would be referred to as later. That so confuses me. My brain just doesn't work that way. But not everyone is me, if you can believe it. You know, different societies, different cultures have different ways of doing things. So they have their Horus names. They also have their cartouche name tag names that they go by. So we've got a new kingdom. So we're going to have a new capital. Now, Scorpion King and those folks were ruling up here in Gergo today, known as Thinis back then. But Pharaoh Menes of the line of Ham now sets up capital in a place that's going to be called Memphis. Before Graceland, there was Memphis, Egypt. So here are some shots of what is seen around there today. Now, not all of this dates to this time frame we're talking about, the 2400s, but just to give you some visuals of what we see in this area we're talking about. So this is all the land here of Memphis. And I noticed too, he made his capital further north, closer to the place he just conquered. And I thought, that's smart. Can remind folks, hey, we're right here. We're in charge. You are us now. So you can see they put a lot of effort into their statues and everything. And what amazes me is seeing how the rest of the town, but even today, seems kind of, no offense, run down. And interesting contrast, seeing the difference between a busy, rundown society and these epic statues that they have there. So that's that. Get out of that. There we are. And so Memphis is, like I said, right up here, just before that whole Delta area that they're in. We just saw that slide. And this reminds me of when I lived on Crete for a year during Desert Storm. It seems weird to have normal people in society, and all of a sudden you've got this statue right smack in the middle of it, society built around it. This is exactly what it was like in Greece. You'd be driving down your paved highway, and all of a sudden off to the side, you'd see ancient columns or an ancient statue. Modern society, they just left it in place, and modern society just built itself all around it. It seems weird. It's not like a shrine that's still honored and worshipped and set off on its own side. They just kind of drew a line around it and built everything up around it that they could. And so kind of an interesting way to see how it's preserved, but life is still going forward. So this new united Egypt is going to be amassing some great wealth. A lot of cultural icons, as we see, are happening here. So it's a really big deal. But remember, these pharaohs, King Menes, King Narmer, they did not come from Egypt. They came through Mizraim. They came from Noah, across from Mesopotamia. So these are outsiders coming in. And actually, in colleges, academia, there's almost a hesitance to talk about this. The fact that these outsiders coming in were able to do this. Well, if we say too much about that, that makes it sound like the outsiders are superior to the local natives, and that's racism. I kid you not, that is actually a thought. And the thing is, reality is reality. Sometimes folks got invaded. Sometimes folks came in who had better technology or more fighting skill. It was just a way of life. And I think everyone here knows the old world was rough. Even though we're just a few centuries after the ark and the flood, as society is developing, it's a rough and tumble world out there. Things are happening. Like children are being sacrificed to different gods during this time frame. Kings, as we talked about, are being buried along with their servants who are being killed to be buried along with them. Another thing that the pharaohs would do is they would celebrate, they would have ceremonies, with the public, big party, big celebration, where they would take a prisoner and they'd bring him, they'd reenact the battle of victory that they already had, and the pharaoh would bash in this victim's skull in front of everyone to celebrate their victory. That's rough. I mean, I think reality TV is bad. I wouldn't want to see that. Whole populations are being slaughtered, named one god or another. And so, yeah, it's just a rough, crazy, messed up world. Again, you take God off the table, anything goes. Man being left to his own devices. Man wants, man takes. And so that's what we see going on here. So we're in the new united Egypt, the very first pharaoh, the very first dynasty, Menes, Aha, who's the son of Narmer, possibly Nimrod. So he makes the capital here at Memphis that we've been looking at here. And he builds a temple here in Memphis. And that's what it looked like, a very famous white walled temple here. This is the temple of the god Ptah, P-T-A-H. The temple of Ptah was known as the Hikuk Ptah. That was the word for the temple of Ptah. In Greek, they called it the Agate Ptah. This is where we get the word Egypt, from this temple that was built right here and now in this time frame where Peleg is growing up. So as we continue our visual tour through what's happening here, these are tombs of the servants during this time frame. So we have evidence of this. We have records of this. We see all this. Let me move this back over there. There we go. So watch me go back one real quick. So again, talking about the tombs that we find here, they're buried with their servants. We see a lot of this happening. And during this time frame, as they become this new nation that's going to do things their own new way and make their stamp on things, they decide they're going to break away from trade with Mesopotamia, with the Persian Gulf where they came from. And now that they've made it to the north, they're going to start trading in the Mediterranean. And this is where they go to Phoenicia and they get those famous cedars of Lebanon that the Bible talks about a lot that were used by Solomon in his temple. Well, they start bringing this down into Egypt and they start building with this wood that they don't have there in this area. So that makes a big difference for them. Start mining turquoise. So Egypt is not only a big dog and the first big world power like this after Nimrod, now they're becoming richer and richer. This is the tomb of his wife. And what's interesting about this is if you look kind of in this area, you see basically recessed paneling, or it's called a niched facade. The facade has niches in it, carved in things. Nowhere in Egypt's history does this exist before. This suddenly came about during this time frame but it already existed somewhere else, Mesopotamia. So this is, again, something that came over, showing that this was a foreign influence here. His wife was actually named for the god of the north, so it could be that he married someone from the north to seal the deal with the unifying of all that. So again, there's an example of that niche facade that we're talking about here that came over from Mesopotamia. Nothing like it ever before in Egypt. So definitely showing the foreign influence as you come in here. These are his tombs. This is where this guy was buried. Aha, Menes, the first ruler of United Egypt. Royal household was buried with him. We don't know in their cases if they were killed or they committed suicide to be with him. Yeah.
Did they get the bones? Did they take the bones out of there?
Yeah. Now, sometimes you'll see that a lot of these tombs have been plundered before quote unquote scientists got there, grave robbers and things like that. But what we notice, and this is especially important in the case of Joseph's tomb that I believe we have found in Egypt, Joseph's bones were gone. Grave robbers do not take bones. They didn't have eBay back then. They took treasure, things that had recognizable value. And so in some of these cases, we see sometimes people have been moved from one gravesite to another. Some of that's even happening today, believe it or not. But yeah, so sometimes we have bone remains, sometimes we don't for various reasons. But usually bones are left in place, and if anything, tomb robbers just take the goodies. But buried along with Pharaoh Menes, first pharaoh of the United Egypt, we have buried with him servants, dwarfs, women, even dogs. There are a total of 36 secondary burials along with this guy in 3 nice, neat rows. He was even given a group of young lions. So I guess the more status you have, the more you're buried with.
Lions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It kills some lions.
And as Sister Minnie said, you can't take it with you. Well, that is 100% a foreign concept to Egypt. You can't take it with you. As I've said before, they packed extra underwear for their pharaohs to take with them to the next life. Underwear for the underworld, yes. Yeah, absolutely. One quick story about this guy, Menes. One story is that while he was out hunting, he was attacked by his own dogs and he escaped on the back of a crocodile. And so in order to say thank you to the crocodile, he made a city called Crocodilopolis. And that's where it comes from. The fact that he was so grateful for that. Historian Manetho tells us that while he may have escaped his own hunting dogs there, he ended up being killed by a hippopotamus. And so, oh yeah. So ends the reign of Pharaoh Menes, first pharaoh of this united dynasty. He's followed by another, next pharaoh after him is named Teti. Then we have another king back over in Mesopotamia and Kish named Ilku. And as I mentioned, the Mediterranean, I'm going to take another field trip now. Go to the city of Tyre. In Lebanon today, back then it was Phoenicia that we read about in the Bible. Tyre and Sidon are famous cities in this area. In fact, in Isaiah, Ezekiel, these prophets make reference to the king of Tyre being an example of Satan and being described as pictorial of that. And so taking a look, just giving us, again, another field trip here. On the seaport here, we have this ancient city of Tyre, one of the oldest cities in the world still existing today. Oh yeah, here on the Mediterranean. So Phoenicia, of course, is where Jezebel came from, probably the most famous for us of these folks. Another good example, the Syro-Phoenician woman, as she's described, who came to Jesus, saying even the dogs get the crumbs off the table, asking for her daughter to be healed. She was from this area of Phoenicia, Syria, Phoenicia. So really beautiful areas, balls up in the air there, not a UFO. So pretty spiffy place to visit. Tyre was also famous because much later than we're talking now, actually in between the Old and New Testaments, they were hard to conquer. They were actually an island that was off the coast, and no one could get out there to conquer them. So Alexander the Great, pretty unstoppable guy. So you see this out here, he actually built all this out over years. He basically built land out to go out and reach them and then conquered them.
Do they get hurricanes?
I have not looked
See that
into.
sticking out there, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh, tidal thing."
Yeah, and when we're from the South, we understand that we don't want to live in Wilmington, North Carolina, because the way the coast is shaped, how it curves up, hurricanes just follow that bend and they kind of miss us in South Carolina. We get hit occasionally, but it comes right up and just hits that edge sticking out right there, Wilmington, North Carolina. Yeah, so Tyre kind of looks just like that. If you're sticking out, you're like in the danger zone. So don't know how bad those if they get hurricanes out there in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I don't
Let's see,
know.
yeah.
They call them typhoons, I think.
Typhoons, yeah. I know, but then if you read the Odyssey, and there was some pretty bad storms that Odysseus or Ulysses went through and all that. So on the Mediterranean. So yeah, it's quite possible. So that's the city of Tyre in Lebanon, Phoenicia, that they're now trading with in the new country of Egypt. So our next pharaoh here, as we're taking just kind of a visual tour through the folks that Peleg is growing up in the same world as, this next guy, Pharaoh Djer. That's his symbol right here. That was actually taken from his grave that we found that. So it shows again the Horus falcon right here. And so let's see from there, let's go to here. Yeah.
Quick, Eric, a couple years ago, before COVID, we went to the King Tut exhibit at the Natural History Museum down in LA. And Eric was like a kid in a candy shop. They had a lot of these artifacts. I mean, just amazing. It had King Tut's chair. I mean, just all this amazing stuff. And Eric kept pointing out to me all the different symbols of the horse, the falcon on it. So we got a few pictures. It was kind of hard to, the lighting in there was really funky and stuff. But that for me was, even though a lot of this stuff is difficult for me to comprehend, that seeing that and Eric saying, okay, Ashley, this is from this time period, and during this time period, here's what was going on biblically, you know, because you don't connect the two.
Exactly.
And there were all these people taking pictures of the mummy or the sarcophaguses and these chairs and these pedestals and just all these different things. And I thought, how many people actually realize this is the Bible? This is biblical times. Probably not many, you know.
Yeah.
I got the whole spiel, you know, because I have a husband who's interested in this stuff.
No extra charge food.
Yeah, right. No extra charge, but it really made it real for me. It really did, and it does add another layer to your understanding of our spiritual ancestors, you know, and the people that they interacted with, just like we interact with people in our time today.
Well, too much of what happens is, by the way, King Tut was during the time of David. So as we're eyeballing stuff from King Tut, David was alive when that existed. So that's kind of neat. And some of the symbols we were seeing go all the way back to Adam's grandson, Enoch, son of Cain, and what he first did, you know, with that first temple there and the symbolism there. So yeah. The whole rest of the secular world obviously recognizes all this stuff. It accepts all this stuff. They have no problem with all this stuff. That's part of their world. They understand it. We have our Bible, and we absolutely accept it, recognize it, and appreciate it, and are always growing in our understanding of it. The two existed in the same world. Now, the Bible was first written by, you know, Job was written, and then Moses shortly after that, you know, writing Genesis forward, starting writing in the 1400s. But the events Moses records were known by the people of the Bible before Moses recorded. But these events of the Bible, these people of the Bible, were living during this. Shem and Peleg and the generations between them are alive when this guy is Pharaoh. And this ceremonial night, for example, kind of hard to see, but etched into here are symbols of this Pharaoh. So this is just a piece of art. So this is real and tangible from this time in the Bible. Everything that happens, there's someone in the Bible we know who was alive for that event. So Peleg's growing up in this world of the 2400s BC. This next pharaoh, Pharaoh Zet, or the Cobra Pharaoh, we see here, there's the Horus, there's the Cobra, that tells us who he is, and here's that niche facade stuff again, down there. Now, our next field trip takes us to something I believe we're all familiar with, and that is the Great Sphinx. Now, the pyramids have not been built yet. The pyramids pretty much recognize those. That's the 4th dynasty. We're just in the 1st dynasty right now. So most folks think that the Sphinx that's there with the pyramids was built along with the pyramids. And its face has the carving of the pharaoh of that time in the 4th dynasty. Actually, I'm going to show you, and I'll try not to get too nerdy and technical. That's not the case. It was later worked on, but the Sphinx is built now, during this 1st dynasty, under this pharaoh, during this time of Peleg. So here's the Sphinx right here, in front of the pyramids. Yeah. The Sphinx is right here. So here are a couple pyramids. Here's the Sphinx, and this causeway is going to be very, very important. So we zoom in here. There's our little dude, the Sphinx. Yeah, there he is. So we can zoom on in and see him there. Again, we're going to talk about that causeway in a second. So in fact, what I want to do is, while Google Earth provides some nice pictures here, I want to get the pictures from this guy right here, because I like these even better. This picture was taken in June of 2021. We just started July. So this picture is basically a month old. So Mr. Heyman Ahmed, thank you very much for these pictures that you have taken. And there he is. So thank you. So I guess it's open for business and we can go tour it now. But, yeah, so well, we'll just catch a ride alongside our friend. See these images of the Sphinx. Now remember, as you see this, taking a sec to load here. You can go to the next one. As we go here, there we go, showing the symmetry there and the lineup when you look at it. But remember, there are no pyramids yet. So there it is, some perspective. See the little folks over there in front of it. There's that very famous causeway I'm going to talk about here in a second. Some more perspective here. Again, he just took these pictures a month ago.
All I've ever seen is just it.
Yeah, you don't see it in relation to the rest. Yeah, so it's on my bucket list. Not only being a nerd, but understanding that this is within a century from the Tower of Babel. We're still talking here. And again, it didn't have a human face at the time, and we'll get to that as well. And actually, when we first went to Egypt in modern times, the 1800s, it was buried. It was all under loose sand. This has been dug out from all the loose sand that covered it.
Who owns all this? Is it the state?
I would say safe to say the government, state, yeah, exactly.
It's not like it's a national park, is it? Like how
right. Well, the national park's owned by the government.
Oh, okay. That explains a lot.
Yeah, I think the government owns like 90% of the land in the state of Arizona.
But you can
Nevada.
tour it, so they obviously.
Yeah. Thank you, government, for letting us in.
Yeah.
Just pay a small park fee and you're good to go.
So we can.
Yeah, but some interesting things about the Sphinx here that we're going to see. This is what wind and sand, blown wind, do as far as erosion goes. The Sphinx is the erosion that's on the Sphinx is horizontal like this. So the erosion that's on the Sphinx is caused by wind and sand. It's not caused by rain. And this is nerdy and technical, but we'll get to that. This tells us when the Sphinx was built. How so? So there's an enclosure around the Sphinx. There are walls on the side of it. there was rain, was water, but on this whole north side here, there's no erosion from the water. There was actually a cleft here, and the water that came down spilt down there at that time. So that's somewhat interesting. We'll see a diagram of that here. So here's how the water would come in, but then it would go down. So this is all safe up here. The Sphinx is facing due east. All the pyramids, they have their cities of the dead, their necropolises, their burial sites are always directly on the east side of the pyramids. The sun rises in the east and their whole worship cycle and all that. Now, why does this matter? Now, next to, on the other side of that causeway, is where the quarry was, where they dug out the stuff to build the pyramids. Now, that was not dug out at the time of the Sphinx because the water came down over, and we see here the water erosion here. If that had been dug out, the water would have gone into that quarry and never made it here. So we see the water shows us, science, that this was here before. The Sphinx was before the quarry. And was the Sphinx originally a lion? Archaeologist David will put his face on there. Yes. Here, from this pharaoh we're talking about right now, in this first dynasty, Pharaoh Djer, here we have dude, possibly the pharaoh, smiting his enemy. Here we have two human hearts being offered to the Sphinx with a lion head. Yeah, like I said, rough world back then. These again, this is the line of Ham coming after the Tower of Babel. And so, yeah, but notice we have a Sphinx in the time of Djer, and he's got a lion head as the enemies are just being smited away. The Sphinx had a beard, which it doesn't right now. The beard fell off. We've got the pieces of it. They're in two different museums now. But the beard of the Sphinx is a god beard, not a king beard. So it wasn't a man, it was the lion god, who is actually Leo in Egypt, in Egyptian language. And on the beard were the symbols of the Upper and Lower Egypt that were united during this dynasty, showing us during this time of the unified Egypt. Now, that causeway. So here's the Sphinx right here. Here's that causeway. Not only did it have to do with the sun and the timing of the sun, you know, from here we have sunrise and sunset over here in this causeway, but there's also something very nerdy and unique about this as well. Here's everything facing due east. Here's the Sphinx facing due east. There's due east going straight down from here, but this causeway bypasses the Sphinx. This causeway goes down here at 14 degrees. Well, who cares? That's nerdy, that's math, that's numbers. What's so special about 14 degrees? Well, and we have that on both sides. Again, this is before there were pyramids. There's this causeway. When they built the pyramids, they left the causeway alone. They dug out rocks on either side, but they left that causeway alone. This 14 degrees is special. Again, there's the Sphinx right here. So what's so special about 14 degrees? The most important thing in the Egyptian calendar and Egyptian life is the Nile River and its cycle of flowing and flooding and bringing its nutrients to the desert land. So that's what everything is based on. Pharaoh's dreams about the famine dealt with cows coming out of the Nile. So here we have the cycle of the sun. Yes, their records show this, and we can backtrack and see this as well. And I showed this at the time when we were talking about Mizraim. Yeah, get this, I'll walk us through this. In the year 2773 BC, so a bit before this time, before the Tower of Babel, we have the beginning of the Egyptian calendar, which was on June 21st, as it correlates the first day of the month Thoth. We have the cycle of the sun. Well, here, as they watch where the sun rises, here's dead center, the spring equinox. Then we have their month Tibi. So this is 120 days later. This is where the sun rises. Notice it is 14 degrees off from the center here. Then you come to the winter solstice, December 21st. You come back around and you have your autumn equinox, and then the cycle repeats and goes all over again. So they were aware of this. And why did the rising of the sun and the marking of time matter to them? Because that's how they're able to track the Nile River and schedule their farming. You had the time of inundation where the flood waters would inundate the land. You had the time of growing, and then the time of going forth or harvesting, and then the cycle repeats. But they noticed that this cycle is slightly off from this date, that the cycle actually, if you follow it backwards, it actually started earlier by about a third of a cycle, 486 years. So the cycle would have started, so they recognize it now, and they say, okay, the cycle we're in the middle of, going backwards, it would have, that's when the cycle would have started way back when, 3260 BC. But 2773 BC is when they see this all happen. Now, here's where I have Eric Cooper's own unique theory that I don't know anyone else who's thought of it. That doesn't mean I'm great, might mean I'm completely off. But David Roll, the archaeologist, these new chronology folks who see there are problems with the accepted chronology, they put this whole thing, 2773 BC, they say that's this time of this pharaoh Djer that this is happening. So that's what, so he's from that time frame. For me, I say, according to the Bible, that doesn't work. If, as the Bible tells us, the math works out, using this Septuagint, that the Tower of Babel would have been 2492 BC, then this couldn't have happened yet under Pharaoh Djer. What I believe they're looking back to is not the Tower of Babel and Horus defeating Seth, those invaders from the Tower of Babel. What does fit for 2773? Ham's son Mizraim, dragging those boats across the desert, coming to Egypt. And he was the first of the Horus groups. So I don't see this going back to the Tower of Babel invaders. I see this going back to Mizraim from the Bible, being the first Horus who came and settled in Egypt. That makes sense to me, but that's Eric Cooper's theory, and Lord will tell me when if I'm right or wrong when I see it. So what's so big about 14 degrees south? In that year, this is another thing they tracked by, the dog star Sirius. I know a little technical, but we'll get through. So heliacal just means when they first see it rise above the horizon. In 2773, that first rising of the dog star Sirius happened on June 21st, the beginning of the Egyptian New Year, first day of the month Thoth in their season of Akhet. The summer solstice would be that 120 days later. So going to the center and then another 14 degrees, you'd see June 21st, the summer solstice. So in their new chronology, 2773, they put that as the first year of this king Djer. I disagree. I see that as the year of Mizraim. 14 degrees south of east is where the sun appears at dawn. 4 months, 120 days after the summer solstice. So that day, the first day of Tibi, is 120 days after the first day of Thoth, beginning their calendar. And they have ceremonies. That's the first day of their Heb-Sed ritual that they would celebrate every year. That first day of Tibi was the date of Horus's victory over Seth. That could very well be true on the calendar, but I don't believe this is the year.
So just real quick, because I don't.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of stuff.
I know, it's your nerdy stuff. But bottom line is, this is how they develop the seasons. Through these calculations. Through
they were smart back then.
Nature, right?
Yes, they had God-given brains.
And this also figures into the timeline.
Yes.
Right? How things play out in the Bible, because numbers are, I know numbers are very important in the Bible. So the reason that that's significant is because this is how we get to where we are today.
Yes.
Looking forward to Christ's coming.
Exactly.
Right? Because, okay.
And we're told in Genesis chapter 1 that God gave us the sun and the moon and the stars to be guides for us for determining our seasons. Well, that's what they did. And so we'll end with this slide, and then we're going to go to the book of Amos if you want to start finding your way there. So what this Pharaoh did do, this Pharaoh Djer, is he did celebrate this event. So here we have this piece of archaeology here, and it basically tells us that Horus, the Pharaoh Djer, was in the town of Dep, which is Buto, which is on that coast there in the Delta Nile, and he celebrated the appearance of that dog star Sothis on that first day of that season of Akhet. So that's the start of that solstice year. That would take, a long time for that cycle to repeat, but they count it down from here. So I think he's celebrating the first horse, Mizraim. And for me, that works and fits and makes sense. So we'll pause here with the sons of Ham. Next week, we'll pick up with the secret grottos that are underneath the pyramids and what that has to do with Nimrod. But for now, we've spent enough time looking at the seekings of man and all their interesting things. Now let's go to the book of Amos, chapter 3. And we're going to close, rightfully so in scripture, looking at the unchanging goodness of our God. Amos 3, verse 3 is a somewhat famous and very interesting verse, especially how it's been used and I think misused. But we'll get to that. Amos 3, verse 3 says this: "Do two men walk together unless they have made an appointment?" Or in like King James, I believe it says agreement. Agreement, yeah. So, okay, basically saying two men aren't going to walk together unless they've made an appointment to do so, or unless they're in agreement. That's okay. This verse I have heard used to justify not fellowshipping with each other. If you and I don't agree with each other, then I can't fellowship with you. And this verse gives me the right to not fellowship with you. That is not at all what this verse is talking about. First and foremost, this is relating to God and the people. And the principle applies, God's principle applies to our relationships. But what is God's principle here? Do God and man walk together unless they've made an appointment? Basically saying it doesn't happen by accident. We form a covenant. We make a covenant with our God. We covenant together as his covenant people. We make an agreement. Sister Ashley.
Just have they go off with
Do it.
marriage too.
Marriage covenant.
A marriage covenant.
Yes.
Marriage, Yeah. Sorry.
Most people, I'll say most, don't wake up to discover they're married. I'll say most people. Leaving room for anything that happens in Vegas, etc. But it's something you plan. It's something you decide and determine together. We're going to come together to do this. So God's point in God's scripture to us is that walking together with our God, with each other, with our spouse happens because we agreed to do so. It matters. It doesn't happen by accident. It matters that this is something we agreed to do together. And we made a commitment to do together. Which brings us down to verse 7. "Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secret counsel to his servants, the prophets." Man, what a verse. Now, does that mean that God tells the preachers everything that God is doing and all the intimate details, and so we don't need faith anymore? I almost want to say I wish. Clearly, that is not the case. What he's saying is God doesn't leave us hanging. God gives us enough to go with. He doesn't want a blind faith. That's nowhere in the Bible. He wants a faith based on relationship. He wants a faith based on experience. He wants a faith based on knowing him and being in relationship with him. So when we're in that relationship, as we get to know him, because we can actually get to know God, and we'll never stop learning about him, but our job is to know him more. And so the more we get to know God, the more we will understand how he works, how he thinks, where his heart is, what his desire is. And the closer we offer ourselves and make ourselves available to him, the more he will share with us where he's at, where he's coming from. And so that's a beautiful verse. It applies to marriage. The closer we are in our marriage relationship, the more we understand where our spouse is coming from. And the closer we feel to our spouse, the more we share with them about where we're coming from. Again, going back to that relationship and that agreement and that covenant. So if you want to have a clue what God's doing, draw closer to God through his people, through his word. Chapter 4 scares me. I won't read anything directly out of it, but in Revelation, towards the end, talking about the end times, God says, I'm doing this, this is happening, that's happening. It says, but they still refuse to repent, repent. Well, chapter 4, verse 6, yet you have not returned to me. Verse 8, yet you have not returned to me. Verse 9, yet you have not returned to me. Verse 10, yet you have not returned to me. Verse 11, yet you have not returned to me. And verse 12, prepare to meet your God. Whew. Yeah, that's some powerful stuff right there. But Revelation isn't the first place that happens. It's right here in the Old Testament. God is consistent. Remember the unchanging goodness of our God. Well, that's scary stuff. That's not good. What's good is his faithfulness and his truth and consistency, showing us we don't have to be in a position to fear because he's given us several advanced warnings and encouragement to draw closer to him and not fall away. Chapter 5, verse 8. He who made the Pleiades and Orion, which we recognize as Nimrod. We'll talk more about that next Sunday. He who made the Pleiades and Orion and changes deep darkness in the morning, who also darkens day into night, who calls forth the waters of the sea, pours them out on the surface of the earth. The Lord is his name. That is our God who put all this in place, put all this in motion. Verse 10, contrasting that with human nature, they hate him who reproves in the gate. They abhor him who speaks with integrity. Well, I thought integrity was a good thing. It's one of my favorite things to strive for. But people don't always want that. But God does. Verse 18. Alas, you who are longing for the day of the Lord, what purpose will the day of the Lord be to you? It'll be darkness and not light, when a man flees from a lion and a bear meets him, or goes home, leans against his hand against the wall, and a snake bites him. So people who might be saying, yeah, they're looking forward to it, they might not be ready for it. 24, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Beautiful picture there, and we'll close in chapter 9. Chapter 9, verse 9, behold, the book of Amos, I am commanding, and I will shake the house of Israel among all the nations, as grain is shaken in a sieve, but not a kernel will fall to the ground. Judgment begins in the house of God, but he says anything of value in there, as we separate wheat from chaff, not one kernel is going to be tossed out in that shaking. He's going to preserve the life. Verse 11, in that day I'll raise up the fallen booth of David, wall up its breaches, I'll raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old. Verse 14, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They'll plant vineyards, drink their wine, make the gardens, and eat their fruit. And finally, the last verse of the book. I will also plant them on their land. They will not again be rooted out from their land, which I have given them, says the Lord your God. Beautiful consistency and faithfulness and desire of the Lord our God to provide for us. So any final thoughts, comments, questions on this morning? If not, enjoy the interaction, and we will go ahead and stop the share there. And